Thank you. Good morning, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Adam Roth, the founder and president of AmpliFund, and Alice Ruhnke, the president of GrantStation, for a brief conversation. So come on up, Alice and Adam. So we'll start with Adam on this question, but we know each person in this room has had probably a unique path to where they are today. So what is one major development you've seen over the past 25 years that has impacted your grants path?
So thank you so much, Mike, for having us here today. Really appreciate the opportunity. I'm actually going to answer this question in three parts. I'm going to take three separate paths. The first path is about the grant professionals themselves. Yesterday, Jana talked about the value that you have and the value you create. The amount of grants that are distributed by or used within the US is more GDP than all but 19 countries in the world. It is a massive impact that you create every day in this country, and the value has changed dramatically in the last 3 years. The dependence on federal funds and federal grants to the recovery and private grants as well, to the recovery of this country after the pandemic, was the singular thing that put the country back on the right path. You are at the epicenter of that. So thank you for all your effort and all your work in that area. The second thing I'm going to mention is about GPA. When I first joined GPA, it wasn't quite 25 years ago, but at first, my first conference I attended was in 2009. I was one of two sponsors, I believe, at that time. It was us in Management Concepts. The trade show floor looked a lot smaller than it does today, where we, I think, 33 vendors today. So congratulations, Mike, and the organization as well for the success and bringing all the vendors to the table as well. And now I'm going to answer the question a little more globally. So what's changed? What's changed is the art of the possible. The art of the possible started back when there was something that was created called the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Our stimulus money was, I don't know if anybody, if you were around, raise your hand. If you remember those funds, remember those days, okay? You had something called fedreporting.gov, which was collecting data centrally for all of the federal government. It was starting to collect jobs created. And all of a sudden, the federal government realized we could collect data in new ways. We could look at grant data in different ways. And that funding and that opportunity, that pain that we had and the opportunity that was created from that led to the creation of the Data Act and the GREAT Act and this greater demand on transparency and tracking and standardization, all of which flows down to you as the grant professional, all of which exists in your world. And I think it will continue to develop, and we'll talk more about that as we go through this process today. But that, to me, is the biggest central change, globally speaking. So individual value has increased. GPA has increased. The demand of transparency, data, information, and standardization has increased. And those are the three things that I see coming through. So great. Thanks, Mike.
Alice?
So I really, without a doubt, think that the biggest change in the past 25 years in the grant profession is really what we take for granted today, just being the internet. And, you know, it's the way we work without even thinking about it. And from yesterday, I'll bet this side of the room doesn't understand that that side of the room, you know, used to have to get in their cars and go to the library and look through the Foundation Center manuals and things right away for guidance as to how to write the grant and that sort of thing. And so now there are so many more resources that we have at our fingertips. Another thing that I really think is just the data that we can now access. The first grant I wrote was in 1997, and I remember using 1990 data because that's all we had. So, you know, I went to the census session yesterday and the amazing tools that are there and that we can access right at our computers. So I think that and all the other resources that we just find by connecting with each other really helps us create better solutions in our communities.
Great. So what strategies can grant seekers employ to harness technology, improve transparency, and foster collaboration across the organizational divisions in order to, effectively showcase their performance and capture the attention of grant makers. Alice, you want to start us off with that one?
Sure. So I know we're going to have a session on AI, and so I'm not going to go into all that that generative AI will do for us. But one of the things that we're really seeing in writing funder profiles and working with different grant makers is really how funders are more interested now in kind of building movements or those more collaborative efforts. So I think the more that we can look at the things that we do and the work that we do and broaden that out to address bigger root causes of problems. And so instead of just one organization working on diabetes education, really, how do we make a healthier community for all? So I think, funders are more interested in that, and it's a great time to really elevate our causes to funders.
Excellent. Adam, from your perspective.
So as we talk about technology, I think it's important to think about the context in which the technology is being deployed. Technology is great and fantastic. It drives process, it can streamline efficiencies, it can make a lot of things happen for you and your organization. But it also requires standardization. It requires standardization within your organization. It requires standardization within the ecosystem in which you operate, which might be your recipients, your sub-recipients. And so you have to have, there has to be pressure put on by the standardization. And what has started to happen is we've seen an increase in the standardization that's happening from a funder perspective, which has increased the value of technology downstream. It allows you to automate more things today than you could have automated 10 years ago, not just because the technology is better, but because the standardization is starting to exist. And I think as we look at technology, as we move forward, I think there's going to be opportunities, whether it's in AI, whether it's in blockchain, whether it's in other aspects of technology that will be focused on building on the competency of standardization and allow that to occur. One state we work with was able to save $280 million annually simply by standardizing business processes. It's not lost on the community to understand the value that those $280 million have, because what does that $280 million mean? That's $280 million of more direct service, more education, more healthcare, more roads. And so this isn't profit margin. These are good things that come out of that process.
So Adam, taking off on that just a little bit, you talked about how these organizations are working through those business processes. So how do those emerging trends in grant management, including that shift towards thinking about core financial management, and maybe even the move from more of a form-centric to a data-centric approach to things, affect the efforts of grant professionals and grant seekers as they're working with grant makers, both from the government and from the foundation perspective?
I think what you said there, the form-centric to data-centric, is the single greatest thing that will streamline your jobs. If we can move things from a form-centric approach to a data-centric approach, it will improve things. Let me explain. So federal government, there's, let's say, 35 grant-making agencies, each of which potentially require a different form for the same set of data that you report. They may have a different version of the SF-425. They may have a different version of the performance report form. Whatever it is, you as a grant person have to report all of those data in. Federal government gives money to, between recipients and subrecipients, let's say they give money to 150,000 organizations annually. It's 150,000 organizations doing 35 different forms to report on grants. That's a lot of work. If you could all report one way to 35 agencies and they could print it out in whatever format they wanted, think about the time that gets saved as the country. Think about the value that can be created. So the idea of moving from a form-centric to a data-centric perspective is critical, and it can only happen with that standardization we talked about. So I think it links together. The more dollars that come out, the more streamlined the process will be for all of you.
Excellent. Alice?
Yeah. So I think that with the with what we were talking about yesterday and the grant professional, that, we're not form fillers or we don't just answer questions, that we're really there working in our communities to provide those solutions and have better outcomes for the entire community. So I think that we always, as grant professionals, need to continue to evaluate what we're doing with that outcome-based measurement and being able to communicate that to funders about what we are doing and the difference that we're making. And that's why we are grant professionals and not form fillers or grant clerics, if you will. And I think that, again, I'm seeing more funders being interested in funding that kind of capacity building work to help us. And with the pandemic, you know, they were providing funds in a different way. And, you know, it's really great to see that they have kept that up post-pandemic. The Osborne Foundation shared yesterday how they've, you know, changed the way that they are providing grants. And I think that, you know, really embracing how they're changing and working to build our own internal capacity, it's a great time to be doing that.
Excellent. So obviously there's more change coming. And so for those seeking grants, you know, what are some of those significant challenges that are going to arise in the near future? And how can we get ready? How can grant professionals get ready to deal with these changes, you know, in light of legislation like ARPA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the coming changes to the Uniform Grants Guidance to CFR 200?
Yeah, so I'll take the last one first. I don't think the new UGG guidance, there's not super significant changes in there that's going to dramatically change your world. There's a Buy America clause, there's some other things, but I'm going to kind of leave that one off to the side. In terms of the other issues that are here, I think fundamentally ARPA changed probably your organizations in a way that more going forward than just the funds. And what I mean by that is all of a sudden ARPA made organizations, grant offices more visible. All of a sudden, grant offices inside organizations, inside governments, were all of a sudden more visible. And even if you're not a government, if you're funded by a local government, that office is more visible. When we sell into customers, we used to sell into the grant office, and then the CFO would come in at the end and sort of bless the deal. Now, when we sell into grants offices, the CFO is in there from the beginning. Integration with the financial system is table stakes because the importance of ARPA and infrastructure investment bills it's elevated the importance of grants within the organizations. And I don't think that's going to change. Like, I don't think we go back from that. And so it's good for the profession because it means the profession will elevate, but it also means there's more pressure and more scrutiny from different levels within the structure on grants and grant information. The last thing I'll say is just a little tidbit on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. One thing that we're seeing without those funds is they're a different kind of money. It's creating pressures on intersections between procurement, grants, and finance in a way that hasn't really been there before because of the amount of contracted dollars that need to come out of those grants, which is unique to these funds as it relates to not just subawards, but actually contracts. And so it creates a different layer of pressure, which we all may face because those funds just really started to flow kind of at the start of this year, even though the legislation is a couple years old at this point. So.
Yeah, and I'm going to leave uniform guidance alone too, because I only know enough to be dangerous about that. But I would, piggybacking off the conversation about the infrastructure bill, you know, that I think that, again, as grant professionals, we might have to add to our toolkit to work more with government agencies, your local governments, your county commissions, your workforce investment boards, those kinds of organizations. And so that may be in your wheelhouse and it may not be, but I think it's something that we're going to have to be able to do in order to, you know, effectively develop the proposals to get funded.
So, and I know we're going to talk more about AI in a few minutes, but there's so much talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, generative AI. So how do you see these tools impacting the grants profession? And could this lead to systems that can do more, as you were talking about, with the data, you know, data collection, data reporting, trends analysis, and, you know, getting to the point, maybe even where funders are becoming more proactive in their grant making? Alice, you want to start us
Yeah,
off?
so, we have a whole session on AI coming up here, but I really do think that these tools are really going to help us in our profession and not replace us. I'm not worried about that. We still need to be those developers putting the information in to get good information out. So there's a lot to learn that I think we'll all be learning about in the next few years as it rapidly changes. How do we actually use the tools? But I think as organizations right now, we do have to start thinking about setting up those safeguards for our organization and our own process to use the technology effectively and ethically. So I think that's kind of maybe the step that we do need to be taking as organizations to figure out how we're going to do that. And we work a lot at GrantStation with Grantable, who is an AI system specific to the grant field, which I really enjoy seeing, that those applications are coming out for us in particular. So I think that it's going to change and evolve, but it's something that is definitely what we're all talking about needing to learn more about and how to harness that.
Yeah, so perfectly honest, I am not an AI expert in any stretch of the imagination. So everything I say, take that with a grain of salt. But our company's looking at AI seriously. We're looking at it from a couple different perspectives as it relates to the grant profession. I think one thing to keep an eye on is the president recently signed a new executive order on AI that was followed up by a draft policy by Office of Management and Budget, I think yesterday, on AI. That references the executive order represents something called NIST, which has existed for a long time. It's a basis, a security and security and technology compliance tools that's used a lot by governments. And when we talk about AI and we talk about grants, there's a small percentage of that that's going to relate to foundation grants, but the grants that exist in this country, the vast majority of it initiated at some government level. And when we start talking about AI, we have to start thinking about AI as it relates to government and how comfortable governments are going to be in relating to AI. And so as we start to think about that intersection, it's important to follow the legislation and the policy to stay on top of that. I think the idea of using AI to target funding is an amazing opportunity. If you're a federal agency and you're trying to fund a great program in Oklahoma, you maybe can identify that program based on an organization's characteristics as it relates to other organizations you fund that have been successful elsewhere in the world. And you can identify that organization who may not be applying for your funds. And you can get dollars into more targeted areas. It can drive equity within funding, equity within programs. I think there's huge opportunity for AI. I know the session was in the other day, talked a lot about AI from a grant writing perspective. Clearly, there's some applications there as well. But I think it'll be interesting to see, Mike, where that intersection happens, because if government doesn't accept it and is nervous about it, it's going to stunt the growth for the sector as a whole, because so much of the money comes through that process.
All right. So we started at the beginning today asking you about what are the things that impacted the grants journey over the past. So as we wrap up, what's your one major development that's coming that you feel will impact the journey of grant professionals over the next 25 years? Adam, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, so 25 years from now, I don't know, maybe I'll be on that Back to the Future skateboard or something flying around. But over the next 5 to 10 years, I think the thing that's going to have the biggest impact is there's something called the Federal Integrated Business Framework, the FIBIF. How many people know about the FIBIF? Okay. The Federal Integrated Business Framework is going to become the federal standard for data for grants. If you don't know about it, I would go back, Google it, look it up. They built the FIBIF based on how we build software. They built the FIBIF by trying to look at user stories and understand all the different data elements that are required to move a grant from the federal government all the way through subrecipients, including performance reporting, financial reporting, and structures. And then they built a series of approximately 450 data elements around that. That exists today. I think you can find it at the GSA website, but it's being reviewed by OMB as it relates to the GRADE Act as a core component of federal grant standards. If I'm in the grant profession, I want to start to understand what those FIBIF data elements are and make sure my organization has a way to track and manage and monitor those. If you understand what those standards are, going back to what I said earlier, once the federal government defines those standards, the automation in the grant space will explode. Because now all of a sudden, everything can be, all reports to all agencies will be able to be automated. It will dramatically change the structure of where things are going. And I don't think that's longer than 10 years away, Mike.
All right, Alice.
Yes. So I'm going to wrap up kind of where I started, that I think that, again, AI is going to be tools that are going to help us do our jobs better and more effectively and more efficiently. And I think that when we do the game of moving from the left and to the right, that AI is going to be the thing that is going to be part of the defining question, and how we're using it, and then how it's helping us elevate to do more, work in our communities, and not necessarily just work harder, but, work and have more impact on our communities, be able to really develop those partnerships, bring people together, all the kinds of things that we need to do.
Outstanding. Well, thank you, Adam, Alice. Let's give another round of applause for our panelists today.